welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, 18 hours daily platform for the Indian micro, small and medium enterprise sector. On this series, it's our endeavor to celebrate entrepreneurship, bring you expert advice from renowned business leaders and help you grow your business. The success of any organization is a direct function of the people who are a part of it. And on today's episode on MSME Dialogues, we're talking about the large number of IPOs which have hit the primary markets this year. Should you go the IPO way and what you need to know before you do so? That's what we're talking today. We're talking all things IPO. All right, then on the panel with me today, let me introduce my guests. Starting with my left, I have Ashwin Parekh, the managing partner of Ashwin Parekh Advisory Services. I have Pawan Bindal, Director Operations at Dun & Bradstreet, India. Joining us from our studios in Delhi, Prithvi Haldia, Chairman of Prime Database. And from our Bangalore studios, Samit Ghosh, CEO of Ujjivan Financial Services. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for being here this evening. I want to kick this off with you, Ashwin Parekh, and ask you, we've seen a huge number of IPOs which have been coming in from the MSME and the SME space into the markets. What are you making of valuations?
In case of funding the MSME and SME, we found that the banking system, which is supposed to be the prime source of funding, somehow or the other have not been able to reach, let's say, this segment in a very effective manner. 2-3 reasons. Geography could be one of the reasons. The second important reason that could have perhaps is the secured lending which the banking system follows. Be it so, the need for the funding, and then we thought IPO was one of the alternatives, one of the places where, let's say, the MSMEs can go and find their funds. Does it really have to be that is one of the questions that I keep on asking, because the trouble with that platform is that the investors, who have to have a good understanding of the risk profile of these borrowers or these, let's say, institutions, these organizations we are raising fund, the ability to understand their risk is perhaps not there at this point in time. The kind of reporting that you see, in the normal course, the media may talk a lot about mid-sized corporates and large corporates, but doesn't really cover MSMEs and SMEs to the extent the investors may expect, them to have. So to that extent, I thought there was a need for, let's say, the government and the regulator to create a new platform altogether. IPO being, of course, one of them. Should the same kind of market persist, should the same mechanism persist for IPOs is a big question mark to my mind, because the cost of that is very, very large. I thought the new guidelines, which are now talking about peer-to-peer lending platforms, could be a good alternative. A good alternative in place of IPOs. What may happen is, the way it functions could function is the same. In the sense, the borrower puts out his requirement onto the platform. The lenders, any lender, high net worth individuals, institutions with surplus, anybody can go onto that platform, look at the kind of investment opportunities which are available on the platform and place a call.
Sure.
So that's something that I thought was a much better alternative. But going back to your question, IPO is a hypothetical, let's say, solution. It's not yet become an effective solution, I would say.
Okay. Prithvi Haldia, you track the IPO space very closely. You track the primary markets very closely. Would you agree?
Well, a couple of things before I comment on your question and what Ashwin Bhai has said. One is that I think this time around, after many unsuccessful attempts at IPO platform for SMEs, we have finally found a structure which has started working. So, if you go back to 92 when the OTC was established, and then many other attempts were made. This time around, because of the regulations and the regulatory framework which has been put in place, I think we are seeing a much healthy development of the IPO market for SMEs. I would like to remove the M part of it, because I think the IPO market is really not for the micro sector, it is for small and medium enterprises. As of today, 154 companies have raised money from this market. We are talking about 1,000 odd crores which have been raised. Is debt a substitute for equity? I do not fully subscribe, because a lot of these SMEs already are, they already have, borrowings from banks or from other places. There is a need to infuse more equity so that you can do more borrowing, you can do some more leveraging. And therefore, I think equity will be required for both growth as well as for, subsequent stages. these companies were not able to hit the main boards because of a lot of regulatory requirements, as well as not being able to attract the right kind of investors. The risk involved in the SME segment for retail investors is nil, because SEBI has very wisely put a 1 lakh rupee a cap on both the investment in the IPO as well as the trading lot. So we are looking at slightly more serious investors, and it's very good to see that a lot of these companies have performed extremely well after their IPOs. 8 or 10 of them have already migrated to the main board, and many more companies would be using this route to grow further.
Okay, Pawan, but what would you have to say? Are you also unenthused by the numbers that we have seen in terms of listing from the MSME and SME space?
So I would like to sort of dwell on points raised both by Parik Bhai and Prithvi. I think in terms of the opportunity, everybody agrees that it is huge. But I want to put some numbers in perspective. As per our own database, Dun & Bradstreet maintains a global database of 240 million companies, 12 million in India. 90 to 95% of them are MSMEs, based on the definitions that we have. In fact, even within incorporated entities, that is the ones that are registered with the MCA, 90 to 95% are actually below the 5 crore sort of paid up capital mark, which means we are talking about really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to discussing the kind of companies or SMEs that could actually list on, let's say, the SME platform. So the size is quite small, or the number of companies is small in relation to the total universe. With regards to banks, Ashwin Bhai referred to it. We're just going through some statistics, and as per the 2015 numbers, March 2015 numbers, collective total loan outstanding to the SME space, MSME space, as per RBI statistics, is around INR 5 lakh crores. And if you compare that to the funds or the issues that were raised in 2015 by the SME platforms, that's 280 crores. That's a fraction of 2,000. So we are really talking about very small numbers applicable to very, very small number of companies. But it is a good start. Like Prithvi also said, that it is a tool that must be encouraged. There must be market making involved around it. The biggest issues that, let's say, the mid-sized companies for whom the tool probably makes greater sense is the issue of corporate governance, transparency, and the cost of compliance that they need to factor in when thinking about raising an IPO. Just to give you a perspective, of the 1 million companies that are actively sort of there on the MCA, only 600K have actually been regularly filing their balance sheets. So you're talking about a culture that needs to move improved at a ground level. It's almost like saying, we need sports toppers in the university, but when our primary and secondary education sort of lacks those beginnings. So I think there has to be a balance in terms of trying to develop these institutional mechanisms, and yet at the same time institutionalizing a culture of transparency and governance, even in the micro and small. So by the time they grow and scale up, they're actually able to absorb and understand what is required to actually get into the big league of IPOs.
Okay. Samit Ghosh, you've just gone through an IPO. At what point did you decide it was the right time for you to go through the IPO route? Was it more a push than a pull factor? What was it?
Well, our journey started in 2005, and we always had in our mind that we would be widely held company at some stage of the other. So IPO was always a goal for us, but it takes a long time. We started in 2005, and as pointed out earlier, we right from day one we had that goal in mind. So in terms of governance, in terms of transparency, we kept that in mind from day one.
Fair enough, Samit. You're saying that yours was more a necessity because of the regulation that exists. But I want to know some of the challenges that you faced along the way. You operate in a very specific sector, which is the finance sector. But if you can, help the entrepreneurs and help the MSME entrepreneurs who are watching this show understand what some of the challenges, what was your personal story like leading up to the IPO?
So, as I mentioned, right from, you have to really work on it from day one, when you start, and you set an objective for yourself, that at some stage I will scale up on my business, for which I require a substantial amount of capital, and the best access to capital is through the stock market, and also have a diversified ownership, So you have to set yourself that goal, and you have to have that goal in mind right from day one.
Fair enough. You're talking about good governance and the governance policies at some of the MSMEs, which could be a cause of concern. We'll continue discussing all of that. Let's take a very short break for the moment on this episode of Leaders of Tomorrow MSME Dialogues, but we'll continue this conversation on the other side. Just stay tuned. Welcome back. You're with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow on ET Now, and on MSME Dialogues today we're talking about the opportunities and challenges for the MSME space when it comes to going the IPO way. Just before we took the break, we were talking about some of the challenges that exist really for MSMEs when it comes to going the IPO way. Prithvi Haldia, if I can bring you in and ask you, one bit of it of course is listing, but once a company lists, in your opinion, what should be the kind of support which exists for these companies? For example, SOPs in particular sectors, maybe manufacturing support. What do you think will go a long way towards ensuring the sustainability of these companies which have listed?
So once you've got listed, the key thing is that every penny that you make should be in the books of accounts. You should not create subsidiary companies or other companies where you take away money. You have to be very, very high on corporate governance. The markets will, and gradually you grow at the SME platform, and then you move on to the main board. I mean, we've already seen migration happening. Better companies would obviously go. Some companies have misused this platform, and
Sure.
I think all platforms across the world, there will be very good companies and bad companies. But we should not really be worried about those bad companies. I think this platform has already thrown up a lot of surprises, both in terms of how the companies have grown after their IPOs and also in terms of returns. So I think the institutional platform exists. The exchanges are giving a great support to these SMEs. The regulatory platform, SEBI, has been, fully conscious of how this market should grow in a robust manner. So I think all things are placed. My concern is only with respect to the SMEs themselves getting into a different mindset, getting into a different level of business operations, a different level of corporate governance, and then saying that okay, I want to now grow through the public markets route, and the route is very efficient, as we have seen. I think if that mindset changes, then you'll have a large number of companies coming to this market.
Sure. Ashwin Parekh, I would like for you to respond to that. So Prithvi Haldia is saying that even for small amounts of money, for example, you have companies which are approaching the primary markets. Is that because there's not sufficient financing support available then?
Yeah, see, there are 2-3 things. I mean, I must say that instead of looking at the micro issues, if I have to look at the larger issues, I mean, I was on a government committee which concluded its findings last year, and the report is out in the Ministry of Finance site, which talked about the funding of SMEs and MSMEs. Now, if I look at the requirements, I mean, as Pawan rightly said, today the banking system is funding 500,000 crores. You're talking about a substantial need, substantial amount of requirement. So that was one. Second was the ability of these borrowers to come clean, have good governance, have good financial statements, reliable financial statements, has not been there. I mean, the changes will happen if they really have to go to any platform to seek money, whether it's public money from banking system or whether it is from the market in terms of equity.
And you have the Mudra Bank which is funding these small amounts.
These small amounts, exactly. So therefore, you have to come clean. So that was one. So we thought that the answer lies in structural changes rather than go through the traditional route. The traditional route of IPOs is perhaps more meant for mid-size and large corporates, and there is already an established market. It's been there for years now, I mean more than decades now. But I thought to create an IPO market, is that the answer? That's the question that kept on coming at the committee level, and I thought structural changes are required. One is very happy to note that at that meeting, the RBI had also, at that committee, the RBI had also two representatives, two members who were representing the RBI. And I suppose it was noted that structural changes are. So on one side, we were talking about differentiated banking. Small finance bank could be one of the solutions, for instance, which is going to play in a regional level, at a regional level, and it will have to find effective economic activities, at that regional place where they're going to put up their play. So whether it is Ujjivan or whether it is anybody else, they're going to find that play, and they will have to approach SMEs and MSMEs, to really create a good portfolio or a good credit book. So that's one thing. That the other thing I thought was some of the structural changes. One possible structural change that was envisaged, and then I think Prithvi touched upon this, something very important. What is becoming critical for the MSMEs and SMEs is to shore up equity rather than debt. Debt they may still be able to find. If they are performing well, if they are in proper sectors, then they may still be able to raise debt. Whether they can get equity is a question mark. So we thought, why can't we have the banking system itself create, equity funds for MSMEs, for instance. So instead of once again pushing them to the IPO market, which I'm afraid is the subject of the discussion today, but I'm taking you away from IPO kind of a, if you have the banking system, for example, imagine that you had 3 or 4 very large foreign investors working with, say, someone like State Bank of India or someone like Bank of India, for instance, and I had actually attempted this for Bank of India. You create an equity fund for MSMEs. Now, MSMEs debt banking system knows very well. If they've already lent 500,000 crores, they have a good understanding of their performance, their past repayments, record and everything else. To create an equity fund to shore up their equity so that the leveraging is sort of available to the MSMEs is something that we thought was a structural change.
One question to you, Pawan, before I get quick closing comments. We're typically seeing a lot of companies which are in the media space, logistics space, which are going through the IPO route. Do you expect more interest coming in from your traditional MSMEs, like say from the manufacturing space as well?
So it's a fair question, and I think we see a similar trend happening, let's say, in the VC space also. And we've always looked at banks as the ones that would do the more mainstream, trade and working capital kind of lending. When we look at the companies that have already listed on the BSE and NSE platform, another interesting aspect that comes out is 70% of those companies belong to the 3 states of Delhi, Gujarat and Maharashtra, Maharashtra being ahead, which means that I think the companies that have greater access to financial resources or greater access to, to the exchanges or are, in financial centers are, taking advantage of the SME platform. So clearly there is an awareness issue that we need to take it to the nooks and corners of the country. There must be good work being done there. And even in terms of the sectors that you talked about, the logistics or some of these sectors where probably, there is not so much of a capital investment, but probably more of a flow kind of an investment which is necessary, which is where some of those investments are happening. But the other aspect, in terms of, what the other panelists have referred to is what would it take for this IP platform to take off. In my sort of opinion, we probably need 1 or 2 breakthrough IPOs or breakthrough companies. Some have already migrated to the main board, and it's only been 3-4 years that these platforms have really been active. Let's say give it another 2-3 years. Let's say one company breaks through, the 5,000 crore barrier of, let's say, market capitalization, and then you will see a beeline of investors and a beeline of companies coming forward. So I am wanting to be optimistic really on that front. The other aspect that I want to bring to forth, vis-a-vis the banking system, the P2P lending that Parik Bhai talked about, that today banks, although they are the predominant lenders to the MSME space, the lending is typically 500 to 600 basis points above the GSEC rate, whereas let's say the top rated corporate gets about 50 basis points or sometimes even lower than above the GSEC rate, which really is a huge cost differential. So that cost really needs to be minimized through greater information sharing on part of the SMEs. They have to be self-disciplined, and government has to embolden institutions that are actually allowing that sharing of information to happen. If that starts to happen, banks may then be able to take, let's say, a greater risk or probably bring their interest costs down. Today, the lending that's happening through the banking sector is in part, at least, supported by the priority sector lending norms. Right, so one has to envisage or study as to whether banks would lend as much if the priority sector lending norms were not there, and that's really what's holding the SME lending up. One last aspect is in terms of regulatory and structural. If the RBI or the government could probably encourage the banks, through law or through institutional mechanisms, to lend to a wider variety of financial institutions and NBFCs. Banks already lend a lot to NBFCs that's counted as priority sector lending. But if banks were opened up to be able to lend more through other alternative investment classes and that be treated as priority sector lending, you might have a quick fix to the SME financing problem.
Okay, we're running completely out of time on the show, so I'd want 20-second closing comments on what you think is going to change really the face of the MSME listings, as well as what advice you would have for entrepreneurs watching the show. Samit Ghosh, I'd like to start with you.
Well, listing and raising money through IPO is an evolutionary process, and I think you have to start right from the beginning. It's like borrowing from banks, get into the discipline of borrowing from banks, having your audited balance sheet, etc., board. Then you borrow, then you get equity investors, maybe through private equity, etc., and then evolve yourself finally to the IPO. IPO is actually the final stage, and I don't think bulk of the MSME sector is ready for that right now. They require probably much more debt, and the government is doing an excellent job today by promoting that through the Mudra scheme, where banks and microfinance institutions are lending to these institutions. I think it will evolve over years.
Sure. Prithvi Haldia, quick closing comments in terms of what it's going to take.
So I'll just refer to the subject of the debate. Are IPOs a viable option for SMEs? Surely they are a viable option for SMEs. Are they a viable or the only option for the economy? Surely not. So I think we have to pursue the IPO route. As more companies get listed, there are more success stories. And the investors which are coming in are investors who have a risk appetite. They are investing more than 1 lakh rupees in any IPO. We also have seen institutional support coming into many IPOs. And I think IPO market, I see this market growing, but not to very, very large numbers, but I think this will remain to be a very viable option for a lot of SMEs who are willing to become transparent, be high on corporate governance, and are willing to grow through the public market rather than private money.
Sure. Ashwin Parekh?
Well, I would say two quick things. One is the IPO route for the SMEs and MSMEs has to be good. Then I suppose two things. One is if the banks were to participate a little more and assist, in sharing let's say the financial statements and other statements, at least with the investors. So some kind of that. The second is the digital disruption. If there was a larger use of digital, let's say, or the technology into let's say at least governance and transparency associated with those at least who are listed, who are planning to list, for instance, then I suppose the investors will get more confidence. Then they'll get to see a little bit more of these institutions, and then they come forward to the market, I would say.
I would echo the thoughts of other panelists. I think for MSMEs to really get into the IPO space, they need to really plan early, have transparency and corporate governance, and importantly also get into professional management. A lot of entrepreneurs make the mistake of trying to keep too many things close to themselves. They have to recognize when they're going public, there is public scrutiny, and investors want to see a diversification of the management, getting experts in so that you can truly scale, which is exactly the reason why you are going to an IPO in first place.
All right, gentlemen, Ashwin Parekh, Pawan Bindal, Prithvi Haldia, Samit Ghosh, thank you very much for taking time out and speaking with us today. That's all we have on this edition of Leaders of Tomorrow, MSME Dialogues. Do remember, you can always write to us at leadersoftomorrow@timesgroup.com. You can reach us on social media using the hashtag LOT or call us on the number flashing below on your screens. Thanks for watching.